Hi, I'm Ketki.
And I'm Sanaya.
We're two curious overthinkers who love pop culture. In this podcast, we'll be dissecting pop culture and technology trends and how they're shaping everyday life. Ever watched a TV show or movie, read an article, or heard a song that made you stop and wonder what it reflects about us and the way that we live our lives? That's where we come in. Welcome to Dude, I Was Thinking, where no thought is too fleeting to dissect, analyze, and follow down the rabbit hole. Hi, Sanaya. This is our take 4. We've been experiencing some audio issues, not really experienced audio engineers. I mean, we try, but Sanaya was sounding like a bit of a chipmunk, but she won't be now.
What do you mean? Sorry, no. That's my real voice.
Clearly, I
trying
was
to sound
mistaken.
like a chipmunk voice.
So,
Okay.
what's
how's
up?
it?
How have you been?
I've been sniffly.
Hmm.
I've had a headache. I've not been great.
Oh,
but
no.
but we're here. We're talking into microphones.
Yes.
So that's a good feeling.
Yeah.
How about you?
I've been okay. I've just been kind of, going through the motions, I guess. Just life is being life, I guess.
I think what you're trying to say is you're spiraling.
I am, and I think this episode is gonna play into that theme. We are spiraling today. Do you want to talk our listeners through?
Yeah. So
what we've
this is it's a new episode variety. And in this episode, it's just going to be me and Ketki. We're going to be talking about things that we like thinking about, things that don't necessarily need to have like a grand unifying question, but that are just interesting, that, lead us gently towards a rabbit hole. And this episode is essentially the process of falling into it,
Yeah.
spiraling into it.
But today we're spiraling into, I think, a very special topic, very
Yeah.
special person to both of us, Mrs. Taylor Allison Swift.
Why did you do that? She's not Mrs. First
Oh
of
no,
all.
sorry, Miss Taylor. Oh my God.
What are
No,
you projecting onto her?
why did I do
Ketki?
that?
Why are you condemning her to like domesticity at the peak of her career?
No, I'm sorry. He was
No.
Sunshine. She was Midnight Rain. So she is definitely not Mrs.
The only kind of Mrs. she can be right now is Mrs. Taylor Swift, like married to her career,
Yeah.
to herself.
Yeah.
But yes, this is, I guess, an episode long in the making, long in the spiraling, because every time we meet to talk about new episode ideas, I think we have like inadvertently spoken about Ms. Taylor Swift
Oh yeah.
inadvertently for long periods of time. And I think it took some time to realize this, that we should probably do an episode about her. And we finally are. So in this episode, I guess it's going to be like broad overview of our relationship with Taylor Swift. Both of us have had our own trajectories
Yeah.
of arriving at her music, of listening to her music, and currently our experience as fans, as people who like to dissect culture. And it's just a ripe moment in time to talk
Mhm.
about Taylor Swift, the artist, Taylor Swift, the celebrity, Taylor Swift, the icon, what her legacy is. What does it mean to be a fan of hers? And what does, as we always like to ask in this podcast, what does that say about ourselves?
Yeah. So the way that we've structured this particular episode is each of us has come up with a bunch of questions. Some we've discussed before, some we'll probably be talking about for the first time on this episode, and about Taylor Swift, which we will ask each other, and hopefully it'll lead us to some interesting conclusions about our own relationship with her, society's relationship with her.
Or
Hers.
raise new questions
Yes.
that we haven't thought of already. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, this is a question that I think about a lot, because very often I find myself in situations where I am the most enthusiastic fan of Taylor's,
Yeah.
and people have called me a Swiftie, and my immediate knee-jerk reaction is like, am I a Swiftie? I mean, I don't know. Like, I didn't necessarily always embrace that moniker of being a Swiftie. So I just wanted to understand, do you have the same experience? Like, do you consider yourself a Swiftie?
Short answer is yes. But I do think that there's always going to be somebody who's more of a Swiftie than you. And I think because we're kind of so tuned into the Swiftverse that we are confronted by these Swifties, and in comparison to them, I often feel maybe I'm not Swiftie enough. But I don't take any issue with the tag in itself because, like, much like you, I feel like a lot of my social circles, I'm the most enthusiastic about Taylor Swift and then known as the quote unquote Swiftie. And, I mean, it's a term which I think that people sometimes use liberally, like even because she is so ubiquitous, right? Like she's
Yeah.
everywhere. And sometimes if you even know like her top, like singles and you really enjoy them, or you're somebody who just follows her album cycle, you can also consider yourself to be a Swiftie.
Mm-hmm.
Like to me, I think a Swiftie is definitely someone who's a lot more dedicated and an involved fan, because I think that it comes with a certain definition now, which is, you pay attention to not just the things that like anybody could really see, like, okay, she's releasing a new album on this particular date, but like, you pay attention to the Easter eggs, or
Mm-hmm.
you're hyper and you go down like rabbit holes about that one tweet that she put out, and like you're like freaking out about that, or you're like crazily obsessing over like this thing that she did on this one particular day. So I feel like that is the Swiftie, and I definitely think that I fall into that category.
Yeah, I feel like if being a Swiftie means being a fan and enjoying someone's work and also enjoying the way in which this artist has chosen to interact with her fans, whether that's through Easter eggs or like, coded messages, I think, yes, I am a Swiftie, but I feel like there's a kind of Swiftiedom, which is this notion of fandom where your star is beyond criticism, where like that's where I start feeling uncomfortable.
Right.
Or this notion of I need to defend this artist from perceived, evil people who are going to steal her throne almost. And I mean quite literally in terms of let's try and stream her music as much as possible to get it to the top of the charts.
Yeah.
Or like, on behalf of Taylor, feel wronged by her ex-boyfriends, her past ex-boyfriends even, or take up what they think Joe Alwyn did or didn't do for the relationship. So I feel like that type of parasocial relationship is what makes me feel uncomfortable about the idea that that is the kind of relationship that some people have with her. I sometimes like find myself getting pulled into that kind of discourse online because that's what my Twitter now X, formerly Twitter feed looks like. But I feel like I don't go head first into that. I would like to remain critical of some of the things that she does as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely degrees, right? Like there is that militant Swiftie, but I'm wondering if that form of like fandom, is it more to do with being a Swiftie, or is it just stan culture in general? Like, can it take on that form? And I feel like historically and even now, like there are other artists who have stands like this, who like would cancel people who, speak up against the artist that they're a fan of.
Yeah, I think that was like one of the questions that we were talking about, like what is the kind of fame?
Yeah. One of the questions that it ties into that question, which is that what is then unique about the kind of fame that like Taylor enjoys specifically? Like what sets Swifties apart from other, stands?
Yeah, I was thinking about this quite a bit, which is that I think that even if there are other stan communities that may on the surface behave in similar ways where, there are these crusades to stream an artist as much as possible to get your faves to the top of the charts, I still feel like for Taylor Swift fans in particular, the kind of investment or stake that the fans have in Taylor's life and career, I think is I can't think of other examples of this. And by that, I literally sometimes, it seems like whatever decision she makes in her personal life, it's like, imagine the Swifties being like 100 million friends who have an opinion on your boyfriend and they will want to make themselves be heard. And that is in part, yes, the outcome of the way in which technology has evolved. Social media feeds into it, the kind of visibility you have into people's lives, sure. but also from like the very beginning, the way in which she wrote about her personal life in her songs, I think there was an invitation. And I don't think that this is like what a lot of people say, which is she's like milking her relationships to like write songs about it and then make lots of money. I don't mean it in that sense. It's like to create a communal sense of what I'm going through, you're going through too.
Yeah.
I'm going to write a song that you're going to find relatable. We're all friends. This notion of I am friends with my fans, it has been a big part of being Taylor's fans, right? Like, how many times have we had conversations about, was Joe good for Taylor? You know, like, which relationship left her feeling fulfilled? Like, we talk about her as though she is a friend, and this has been cultivated through her music and the way it has, you know, charted the course of her life. That now in 2023, if she's dating someone, the fans are going to have an opinion on it, and they're going to make themselves
Matty Healy.
yeah, they're going to make themselves be heard, and she in return feels responsible to her fans.
It's not a one-way relationship. That's also the thing that is really unique
Yeah.
also about this.
But it's still parasocial. That's
Yeah.
the thing. It's still parasocial, but I do think she feels the need to, you know, factor her fans'
in
thoughts into her next moves.
Yeah. Like her personal journey is our personal journey, for sure. It's very voyeuristic also. I feel like there is definitely, like, it takes an ugly side. I think that we also kind of like consume her life with this sense of like voyeurism. Like, and that,
Yeah, but she's also invited us in
yeah.
to a great, like, it's not like the happy outcome of her music. I think that the fact that she has cultivated such an interactive fan relationship, which I think is definitely one of the things that have made her stand apart from all her contemporaries and even people who have come after her, the way in which she engages with her fans. She's invited them into her house for secret sessions. She's, you know, left hints, you know, in her albums and liner notes where she wants fans to decode what
Yeah.
a song is about. She's never going to say it outright, but she wants fans to engage with music in that way. And like, there are limits to that because we don't really know this person. We don't really know what she's like in a relationship apart from her own songs about it. So I think like this is different because I think it's that thing where there's an invitation into a very intimate part into her lives, which she shares with her fans to create a feeling of friendship that and that we're in it together. And at the same time, if fans want something, she almost feels obliged to give it to them.
Yeah. The 10-minute version of All Too Well.
Yeah.
I think that like plays into like creative decisions that she makes for sure, which I think is definitely, it's always very exciting and it kind of reassures fans and makes them engage with her further because like she gives them what they want.
There's a possibility that she's gonna take your tweet seriously. you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like if you have an idea for like, you know, how many times have we seen tweets where concept album for TV debut, you know, and like they've just taken like random pictures of her and they've made like an entire presentation of what they think the concept for the artwork should be.
Yeah.
And it's like they are that invested in her career where it matters to them like what her next move is. And I feel like this kind of fan service, for lack of a better term, it sometimes like results in great things. All Too Well 10-minute
Yeah.
version being an example of that. And sometimes I feel she is just like, I don't know, she's too responsive. Like she doesn't need to be that
Yeah.
answerable. Like, you know, the more Lana Del Rey
Oh, yeah, I
version,
was
like that
thinking the same
doesn't,
thing.
that's another example of her overcorrecting because there is a sense that the one group of people that she will not turn against no matter what are her fans.
Yeah.
And I don't think that is necessarily a good thing.
I mean, I think about this, like, this definitely played into the whole Matty Healy situation. Like, there was definitely some very, like, valid criticism towards her dating Matty Healy. But also at the same time, I think, like, as fans, where is that line, right? Like, you can criticize her work. And maybe because you feel like you have this, like, personal stake in her life almost, that you can sort of have an opinion on who she's dating. But again, the militant Swifties got really militant about it. And I think it impacted her decision and led her to break up with him. I wonder about that, you know, because
I think she's at this moment in her career too big to date. I don't think she can. I just can't imagine a scenario in which she is like spotted with someone and the Swifties won't have opinions on it.
Yeah.
And I just don't see a scenario in which she's spotted with someone and that person's socials are not flooded. Like, I just cannot imagine this. And I think I've never, at least I've never heard of something like this where you are so huge that it's no person that you date, they're going to be subject to a lot of scrutiny. And I think ultimately, like, Matty Healy's checkered past, like, it crumbled under that scrutiny. And yeah, she's bigger than she's ever been. It's like, I don't know what kind of life she leads when she's not on stage during this tour, the Eras tour, which she's been on since March at this point. And this is going to be her life, what, till the end of, I think, November of 2024, which is almost like 1.5 years of, like, almost 2 years of constant touring.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think it's like a great business decision for her, but how does this pan out in terms of her life? Again, like, as fans, we're having this conversation, like, what does this business decision mean for her life?
I know.
You know? So what does this artistic creative decision mean for her life? So I don't think that there are other famous people who are discussed and their personal lives discussed and this enmeshed with their creative output.
To this level of granularity, that is.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I think, like, if we go back to the personal stake that fans feel like they have in her music, in her artistry, like, let's like backtrack a little bit. So our own journey as fans, what was the first Taylor Swift song that you had ever heard, and when?
Love Story in 2008, I think.
Okay.
When it came out. So that, like, her first big single. Like, I hadn't heard of her before that. And I was also living in Singapore at the time, and I feel like her debut album was not a very big in the international charts for sure. So yeah, Love Story.
Same. I think the first song I heard was also Love Story, and this was back in 2008 when everyone in school had MSN Messenger, and like multiple people just like changed their status to Baby Just Say Yes.
Aww.
Baby Just Say Yes. And that was like my entry point into Taylor Swift. But was this when you became a fan?
Yes.
And if not, what was the song that made you a fan?
So it was actually Love Story, because I remember listening to that song. It was playing on the radio, and I just remember like falling very instantly in love with it. I was a very romantic teenager growing up. Like, I was definitely, you know, consuming a lot of the similar things that I suppose Taylor was consuming at the time, which is, you know, your 2000s era rom-coms, reading a lot of romantic novels and stuff like that. And this song kind of plays into that romanticism that I guess I was idealizing at the time. And so it was just like clicked for me. And it just like, it made me feel very excited. I think I listened to her single before her album came out, if I'm not wrong.
Okay.
So I waited for her album and then listened to the entire Fearless album. And I just remember feeling very, like, I just felt like this person was singing about love in a way that I had come to idealize. And I really like enjoyed that. And that made me a fan. Yeah.
I'm a late bloomer when it comes to Taylor.
Yeah.
Because I heard Love Story and, you know, I was not in touch with my emotions. I think to be a Taylor Swift fan when you're 13, there has to be like some emotional awareness. And I did not have that. I don't think I did. And I think that was the first song I heard and I liked it. I like music and this is on the charts. And the music I listen to is like the top, whatever, 100 best songs, blah, blah, blah. Like that was all the thought that went into listening to it. And the second song I heard was actually Mary's song. And then the third song I heard was Crazier from the Hannah Montana soundtrack. So essentially whatever was showing up when I did like a Google search of like top 100 songs, Billboard list, and whatever I could find, like I used to just download all the artists and I wasn't like, I don't think I was immediately enamored by Taylor Swift or like even thinking about her storytelling at the time. And I had a very loose relationship with her after that where, you know, Shake It Off was one of my like go-to dance songs. Like if you start playing it, I'm immediately dancing. So that was my relationship with that. I remember when I first saw the video, I wanted to get like a long bob. I wanted a lob after seeing her new hair.
Yeah.
I didn't know any of the, lore behind it, that she had like long curly hair and her cutting her hair is like signifying her pop crossover. I had no reference points to any of that.
Mm.
And ultimately, I think it took me getting in touch with my emotions for me to like, it was like
Really, yeah.
just inevitable after that happened. So I got in touch with my emotions in my early 20s. And I feel like I got to Taylor Swift as a result through Lover,
Mm.
the song and the album. I think that's what happened. And then it's like 2020, it's the pandemic. And I watch Miss Americana and I'm like, wow. I'm like witnessing just how thoughtful she is for the first time and how articulate she is. And I was basically just primed to be a fan.
I remember you sending me the New York Times video, like the diary of a song on Lover.
Yeah, because I was also going through a phase in which I was writing poetry.
Oh yeah.
So I was unemployed and writing poetry and in touch with my emotions for the first time, and it was 2019 and it was about to be 2020. So that's when folklore sort of descended.
Yeah.
It just descended from the heavens. I was fully primed to just dive headfirst.
Yeah.
So late bloomer Swiftie here.
I mean, I feel like my fan relationship with Taylor, there's been two phases of it. So the first was like when I'm 13 years old and I listen to Love Story and Fearless for the first time and I fall completely in love with her. And then I listen to her debut album, really, really enjoy that. I still think Teardrops on My Guitar is like a fantastic song. But then I think I really fell prey to a lot of like the negative commentary around Taylor Swift. And I remember listening to Speak Now. I think it was around the like Kanye incident when people started to really like diss her, like very, very publicly. And it became almost like uncool to like Taylor Swift. Like I remember very vividly that this was the reality. And like people in school would like said things like, oh, you like Taylor Swift, and I was just a teenager and I definitely like fell prey to that whole idea, which obviously I regret now. And it was also like a turning point in like my journey with music in general. So I was sort of hanging out with a lot of boys and listening to a lot of like classic rock, which is great.
Yeah.
But so I rejected her for a long time. I started to reject a lot of the ideas that she came to embody. And then I think like sometime around 1989, of course, like she became like massive suddenly. So I listened to all of 1989. I remember liking quite a lot of it, but just listening to it as you would listen to any like mainstream pop album.
Yeah, like you're passing through.
You're not really engaging with it in a very deep way. Same like you, I think the second phase of my fandom journey sort of started with Lover.
Phase 2.
Which I just came to really enjoy, and then just Folklore hit and I'm like, oh my god, this woman is
I think this is another thing that I've been thinking about as well in relation to my fan journey with Taylor, and you've kind of touched upon that. I don't think it's ever been cool to like Taylor Swift. I don't think it's cool right now. I don't think it was cool back then, but
it's cooler. I don't know.
It's maybe, I think because there are more fans than ever before, maybe it's more difficult to deride them directly, but I don't think it's considered generally cool to like Taylor Swift. Like, I don't think, like, I feel like whenever I think about what's cool, what isn't cool, it's still like, I need to really consciously assert myself. And it's definitely not chill to like Taylor Swift. I'm not a chill person about this. But this idea that, it definitely was never cool to listen to Taylor Swift, but I feel like there was a point at which it became distinctly uncool to listen to her. And like you said, like, it's, you start thinking about like, okay, what do boys think about this music? Like, is it complex music? What is she singing about? So I just wanted your take on this, which is, do you think Taylor Swift is girl music? Like girl dinner, the trope on the internet, which is this idea that here is something for consumption, which is not meant for everybody. It is very specifically curated to appeal to women, and that's the idea. And because of that, it is derided, because it's thought of as girl music and not, what you would associate with like dude rock is this girl music and automatically uncool. Like, what do you think is the relationship between Taylor Swift and ideas of girlhood? And what does that even mean now that so many of her fans are well into adulthood?
I really think that as I look at her catalog of music and especially her like early work, what really makes it stand out for me right now, and this is like me now as a mature listener, are these like themes of girlhood. Like they are as core to her music as, just it is what defined the very identity that her music would come to take. And it is very closely interlinked to themes around girlhood. And especially the time that like that music came out, which was like now at this point like about like 15 years ago or something like that, men like. And also it's a lot of like young teenage girls liked her music, which as we know historically it's never considered to be cool if young girls like your music. But the reason the young girls like your music is because there are themes around girlhood that appeal to them, and it is these young girls that make you popular. So I think her music is very closely interlinked to ideas and themes around girlhood, and she's suffered quite greatly because of that. At least her image has. But her fans, and especially those who were able to like stay consistent to really like own that relationship with her, and they really are also the reason why she's as popular as she is today.
Yeah, I think this is like significant because I feel like what occurs to me I have fully dived into her music as an adult, right? Like looking back, like I've gotten onto her 2019 and then dived into the back catalog and sort of looked at it through the lens of an adult who would look more kindly upon whatever girlish fantasies I had when I was younger or didn't have, or what a girlish fantasy even was. So it always occurred to me that this is a person who is not afraid to be uncool, right?
Yeah.
The thing that really dictated or like made people afraid to kind of, publicly be a Taylor Swift fan, this is a person who's like, yes, I love love stories. I'm going to write a song called Love Story. I love the idea of like, just incredibly romantic storybook ideas of love. I'm going to write lovesick, like, stories about, meeting someone and being enchanted to meet them. And, it's all of the things that would be considered basic. She would weave that into her song craft. And I think the thing that was undeniable even then is that she's a crafts person, right? She's weaving stories together. And, all the things that you would sort of deride, like, glitter, storybook romances, the idea of like a fairy tale, all of those things. She's like, yeah, I buy into those fantasies, but I'll be like self-aware enough to talk about how those fantasies even shatter. And none of this is going to get me any cool points in any kind of like court of public appeal. But I'm not trying to appeal to people who are either going to be derisive of these ideas, or who are maybe, if you're too afraid to own up to it, but you actually feel all of these things on the inside, like there's still my music you can listen to, which provides an articulation for that. So I feel like it is girl music, but only because she wears all of those themes that, people dismiss her for so proudly on her sleeve. So even that thing that we just spoke about, like the fear of not being cool, the fear of being basic, her response to that is to like sort of assert it even more. Like she did in We Are Never Ever Getting Back Together, where she's like, that indie record that's much cooler than mine. So she's like, I'm not cool and I know it. Okay, I'm not. I know this about myself. So, and that's aspirational.
That is so admirable. To me, honestly, like to be that unapologetic, like just to be that honest and self-aware about who you are, and just being like, and also there's a sense of like, I know I'm not cool by like just the public's conception of what cool is, but I think I'm cool like within myself. I think like
being yourself is being cool. It's like that adage, right? Like it sounds super cheesy, but like you see this woman sort of living it out in her songs. when you look at that as an adult, like it's a huge thing that you were like 22 years old and your boyfriend who likes, like, indie records and like derides you for like writing basic music, that didn't affect you. And I feel like the thing that overrides all of this is that I think she knows she's really good at what she does.
Yeah.
I mean, she's a very confident person. I think even when she's not confident, she's kind of confident. And this has been what keeps me going back to her, which is her emotions aren't exactly like, I wouldn't say she's completely relatable. I don't feel that. I think that's something that, kind of gets lost in the fray where we kind of talk about how we've grown up together, like the fan community's grown up with her. I very often feel like she has responded to a difficult situation in the way I wish I could, but I know I'm not. So I'm going to listen to this song because the song makes me feel good. It is possible to have a healthier response to the situation, but I know I'm not feeling that way.
Yeah.
Those emotions aren't like, oh, wow, my idol feels the same way. It's more like, wow, this is such a great way to handle the situation. Like, for example, like she's 19 years old. She's had what one can imagine is just a douchey, horrible experience with John Mayer. And, like no surprises there or whatever. But the song that she sings, like just the fact that you can be 19 and you can be like, I'm going to be shining like fireworks over your sad, empty town. She's like, fuck you.
And John Mayer at this point is like super established, like he is way older than her. And she is like literally putting him on the spot in this like just such a satisfying way for a listener.
Yeah, it's a superpower. Like, I wish I could do that.
Yeah. And especially at the age of like, at that particular age, like putting men in their place, I don't know how to do that. Like most of the time you're just kind of just like, oh, okay, I'm just going to take whatever this guy is like, throwing in my direction.
Or it's like, yeah, I mean, I remember being 19 and not having these kinds of responses to like difficult situations with boys.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's a superpower. And the way she's able, I think she's someone who's very interested in power dynamics in relationships. And I think her biggest source of power is her ability to, respond through song or to like process her emotions through song and, like be able to articulate herself in this way and have it resonate with so many people.
I actually like made a note of this earlier because I also agree that her music, like the appeal of it isn't entirely like relatability so much as, and it ties into what you're saying, which is that it takes on an aspirational quality almost. Like we as young teenagers and children are never encouraged to express our feelings in this way. And especially like, the culture that we specifically come from, like it's feelings, especially towards the opposite sex, are often, you're more encouraged to repress them as opposed to express them. There was something freeing about listening to her music and listening to somebody who's of a similar age, slightly older than you or whatever, but like, talking or speaking to similar experiences that you've had, but in such a mature, such an honest way. It's more to do with aspiration as opposed to like relatability for me, for sure.
So, yeah, I think I did have a question about this, which is, what is it about like this white American artist who started singing country American music that is so appealing to us?
Yeah.
What makes her feel so ubiquitous, so universal? Like, I've wondered about this a lot, where she's singing about what are essentially, like her experiences are obviously sort of refracted through who she is. She grew up in a fairly wealthy family. Her parents were able to support her career in music. They relocated to Nashville so that she could pursue her career in music. And, her father had a stake in Big Machine, Scott Swift. He was an investment banker. So she obviously comes from a place of means, resources.
Yeah.
This is not considered a viable career option in India.
Of course.
So it's already a story that's a little removed from us. But I play her songs when I'm down and I feel happy.
Yeah.
How is that happening? Like, what on earth is making this possible? And
what is it?
I feel like I've thought about this a lot. And I think that a part of it has to do with how, her entire career, and this is like well documented, well, like analyzed by multiple, pop culture analysts and critics who have spoken about how Taylor's is always like, fighting against something. She's like the underdog who, in her country years was facing Nashville as in the country music establishment. And then when she came into pop, she was like the person who was kind of to the left of pop. So like she was not a pop star. And in music video for Shake It Off, that's her kind of poking fun at herself. Most recently, she has like this antagonist in her former label, Scooter Braun. So she's always like up against something. Or it's like ex-boyfriends, relationships where she's always like wrestling with something. So this notion of the power dynamics in her career has been such a through line so far, where I feel like the way in which she is able to wrest control and be able to claim power in situations where I know it won't be possible for me to do that. Like, for example, like if you take All Too Well, 10-minute version as an example of this, or even the original, like just the 5-minute version, where she is essentially talking about a short-lived relationship which has ended because she's much much younger than him, as we later find out, but it has ended. And I'm sure like so many of us is left in a position where you're trying to make sense of a relationship which quite clearly meant like very different things to both people involved. Right? And what is her response? Her response was to say, I remember it all too well. I was there. So I know it was not nothing to you. Right? You can say whatever you want. You can act like it didn't happen. You can act like it doesn't matter. But my memory is crystal clear. So I feel like that confidence with which she is able to stand up for herself, even at her lowest, when she's her most dejected, I think that's almost like a superpower in my mind, where you're able to stand up to the person who has hurt you and say your piece. So I feel like that's the thing. It's empowering to listen to. I know that there are situations in which I haven't said exactly what I've wanted to say in that moment. I don't have the ability to write a song about it, record it, and it's so catchy that everyone's listening to it. Like, I know I don't have that. But knowing that there is someone who is able to capture that power dynamic that is faced by so many women in so many parts of their lives. And it's ironic because she's the most powerful person in the music industry in America right now, but still be able to, in certain moments, feel powerless and then write about it. I think that's a very compelling thing. That affects people on a very like visceral level.
And it's also a very magnified version of an experience that I think a lot of women also face, which is very often you're like, I mean, it's so common, right, to be written off for being a slut, or like, I don't know, your boyfriend can just be super manipulative and tell you you're this thing and you're not. And like Taylor has experienced all of that at like such a great degree, and then it's quite literally that thing, right? Like the pen is mightier than the sword. Like she just reclaims her narrative each time.
Yeah, she's able to do that.
Yeah, which is like, it's aspirational. It is like affirming in such an, it's incredible to even just watch and to witness, I think. So,
and the other thing is like, she is exactly who she is, which is an incredibly feminine, girly girl who is nerdy about a lot of things, who gets overexcited about a lot of things, is probably obsessive and pays a lot of attention to detail, is like Hermione level good student when it comes to the work that she does. And she wears it on her sleeve, right? Like there is no notion of this person is effortlessly good. She's like, no, I work really hard. And I think the fact that hard work is almost a part of her brand, like there was, I think when the Eras tour was first being reviewed, when it first started, there was a Guardian article that was called Pop's Hardest Working Star. Yes, Pop's Hardest Working Star gives the Eras tour her all. I think that these are like undervalued traits.
Of course.
Right? Especially in celebrity culture where it's like you're born with it, or you are just so effortlessly cool.
Yeah.
And I think all of those, the fact that she works hard, the fact that she is trying to assert herself in all of these situations, it's all very compelling for us to witness, as you said. Like sometimes you associate with like a Beyonce this almost like otherworldly quality of, you know, how is she singing in this way, how is she able to dance in this way. Like obviously those are all miraculous things, and maybe Beyonce has let us into those aspects of her career in which she like will say that, you know, I had to watch what I was eating to be able to perform at Coachella. Like she will let us in from time to time. But for Taylor, this is a part of her work. The fact that I'm like, you know, I'm going to enter the studio in the morning and leave like 15 hours later. I've been working the whole day. The fact that she's going to announce a re-recording project, which is obviously so much work, and do that simultaneously with recording new music, have a 3.5 hour long show. Like there's hard work, which is counter to the idea of like someone who's born talented. The fact that there are like albums of hers where she's not singing well, and you can see her improvement over time. You don't see a lot of artists like that. Ariana Grande was a great singer in Yours Truly, her first album, and she's like a great singer in Positions, her latest album. You're not seeing like growth being this explicit. Is I've not seen it in many other artists through the course of their careers.
So speaking of like Taylor sort of owning her own narrative, I mean, like I think that is embodied in, of course, like a lot of the re-recordings that she has been putting out over the past couple of years, and now with the Eras tour. And I was wondering if we can take some time to like talk about the Eras tour in general. I think we've been consuming it virtually, of course, much like most other people. And it's interesting because like, you know, the Eras tour also came at a time where this like whole In My Dash era, basically In My Dash era is like this popular TikTok, Instagram saying. And I think like Taylor sort of like played into that. And I'm just wondering, like, what do you think makes the notion of eras, like, as it's now come to be used colloquially, like so compelling to her and also to us, like societally? Like what is it, like why are people like sort of erifying like small moments in their lives?
So I feel like the Eras tour, calling her concert tour this, is a very good like marketing strategy. I definitely feel like, so this kind of plays into Taylor being very attentive to her fans and listening to them. I think that Taylor Swift fans, Swifties, were always saying things like, I'm in my rep era. And I saw it most in relation to Reputation, because Reputation is such a distinct aesthetic era. Because, you know, it's dark and brooding, and she's wearing black lipstick and not red lipstick. You know, it's very distinct from her other lighter eras. And it also came to me like stand in for like, I'm in my villain era. Like rep era is my villain era. So I feel like she definitely had her finger on the pulse when it came to this. And she also sort of played, I think, what does the conceit of an era say about us is that, I mean, we all live, a huge part of our lives are lived online right now. And I think eras has to do, an era, the way we use it has a lot to do with an aesthetic, right? An aesthetic, a phase. It's a different word for a phrase for us. And it's a well-defined entity, aesthetically well-defined. It's, in Taylor's sense, it's also sonically well, like for her, the way she describes it, it's sonically well-defined. And it also captures like a mood in time. So these are all very like netizen thoughts, right?
What is interesting is that like the actual definition of an era doesn't indicate something that's fleeting. It indicates like a vast expanse of time. Whereas the way that we reclaimed it,
era? Is that an era?
What is like a what?
Yeah,
exactly. It's a long period of time.
The Mesozoic era. Yeah, that's what it is.
But the way that we've reclaimed it, it's become like this fleeting thing. And I think that I think for me, and maybe people in general, there's a comfort in, like, because we've come to like define eras as phases. I mean, there's a comfort in knowing that the eras end, in the sense that you can be in an era and then be in another
You can be
era.
lots of things.
You can be lots of things.
Yeah. And I think that's definitely a part of it, like, you know, trying on a new identity for a period of time.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that the Eras tour, calling it an era or like experiencing her albums like eras, is more about the fans than it is about her specifically. Because I think that I don't think all her, even though there are like thematic, like you could kind of argue that each album has its own thematic focus, which is slightly different from the others, but I don't think there are 10 eras.
Yeah.
I don't believe that, but I do think that there were 10 different moments in time when these albums were released. And I think she's trying to like echo the fans' experience of an album when it was released. And I think that because her own approach towards making her music is, I wanted to have like its own aesthetic identity, that lends very well into breaking up a live performance into 10 acts. And this is one of the instances in which her kind of leaning into what do fans think about this? How do fans experience my music? I think that's worked really well, because I think she's found like a little sweet spot between how her fans receive her
Yeah.
and what is she comfortable doing, you know, like how is she most comfortable. So I think quite literally she's wearing different outfits on stage,
Yeah.
embodying
There
different
are different
moods.
colors for each era.
Yeah, different colors, different moods for sure.
Yeah.
Completely different aesthetic, different sounds. So I feel like it was a very like savvy marketing decision. Like I know we're like reducing it to a marketing decision, but it's like the best form of marketing.
No, absolutely. And the fact that like people are dressing up in, when they're attending these concerts, they're like as different eras. Like I'm in my Fearless era, or I'm like,
Yeah, you like we're going for the concert in London. Like this is a thought I'm having. Like, what era do I want to go as?
Yeah.
You know, like what represents me and my fandom and my personality and my. So it's more about us. We're thinking about like what we want to embody as much as she embodies those things on stage.
Yeah. You alluded to the fact that you wouldn't define Taylor's eras as like 10 different eras. How would you define her eras?
But I think that rather than the number of the eras, I do see this tour as a massive statement and sort of retrospective look at her career. And I think she is doing it to have it coincide with her re-recording project. And I think that it's gonna end with her having re-recorded all her past albums.
Yeah,
And then it'll be an end of an era,
of course. Yeah.
right? Like the first 17 years of her career. And I don't know what she's going to do next. So I think that very conceptually, it is an era. Like, I don't see her making a very, like, you know, just like, I don't think it's what's after Midnights. It's more like what's after the Eras tour.
Yeah.
Like, what you've reclaimed everything. You're the biggest star on the planet. You've unprecedented in a league of your own. What do you do next? I don't know. So I think it's the appropriate term. I just don't think there are 10 of them.
That leads me to my next question.
Yeah.
Which is, what do you want to see her do next? You know? What?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we were talking about this earlier today, and you sort of said, you know, I feel like she's gonna just become a hermit after.
I would like her to take a hiatus.
Same. Yeah.
Because I also was not very jazzed about Midnights.
For sure.
Yeah, as an album. I felt like,
I think the lack of
Yeah.
inspiration kind of shines through in that album. Like, it had started to feel like she was, like, it was,
recycling old ideas.
yeah.
Yeah, because she's looking back, right? It's like this, even the idea of the album is like, I'm looking at like 13 nights in my life when I couldn't sleep. Like, but no, I don't want her to write songs about moments you've already written songs about.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So I feel like musically, I think that I would really like her to not be as bothered about things like awards and chart positions and like commercial performance. I want to maybe see her do something smaller, or like, I feel like one thought I've always had is I want her to be, record like an album of duets with like female singer-songwriters, something like that, like something she's not like done. I want to see her get out of her comfort zone in a different way where, you're sharing space with another performer. Maybe letting go of like pop songwriting,
Yeah.
maybe, I don't know, like just I want to see her do something different.
Yeah.
But I think more than anything, I think she should go on hiatus for some time.
You can really be in your own bubble, right? Like, especially when you're literally have reached like the heights of pop stardom. And it's like, I would want her to go on hiatus and like sort of like figure out who she is now as a 33, 34, 35-year-old, and just sort of like be very raw about that. And not like, because I feel like she's had to put out music every 2 years. And I think after she sort of drops all of her re-records, she's probably not even bound, I hope, by any label or, like to have to do that. And I think she can operate on her own timeline and like really go out and live that life. Because a lot of her music has also, like you said, like especially with Midnights, it's tied to a lot of like older ideas. So who's the new Taylor? I would like to like see her explore that.
I feel like you get glimpses of who she is now on Midnights, where I do think that Midnights has a certain ambivalence about, ideas of marriage.
Yeah.
Has ambivalence about like, she's thinking about life as a life she's gonna probably maybe spend alone. She's flirting with those ideas in like you're on your own kid, you always have been. But trying to make peace with that. So I feel like we're already getting glimpses of that, but they are not like dominant themes in her work yet. They might just become. But I also really believe, like you mentioned, right, like maybe she has like obligations to release music at a certain cadence. Maybe, and we may see this through the Eras Tour concert film that's releasing next month. She recorded that independently and is also releasing it independently without a studio. And it's already pretty successful. She just had to put a trailer up there, and it's already sold like I don't know how many millions of dollars in pre-sales.
Crashed or something.
She can. What's stopping her from doing that when it comes to her music?
Yeah, I mean, speaking of the Eras Tour film, I also remember that she's writing a film.
Yeah.
Like.
Yeah.
I think the other thing. I mean, that's something that definitely really excites me. I would love to watch a film that was like written by Taylor Swift, but I mean, exploring new creative forms could be an interesting next step,
Yeah, I don't think, I feel like she's not going to leave music behind.
Of course.
But I do think that she's flirting with being like the biggest pop star on the planet, but also an independent pop star. Like I just wonder, because if a label is just incidental to her right now, because she signed on to a new label in 2018 or 2019 at this point.
Lover.
So she was still operating in a very different mode back then. But right now, she's released like 7 albums in 4 years, including re-records. And yeah, I wonder if there comes a point where she feels like she just doesn't need a label anymore.
Yeah.
And she can just be in a position to actually do whatever she wants. Like, she's going to have like more than $1 billion in revenue through this tour. I wonder if there are going to be like changes in the way she operates because of that. So exciting to see, I guess.
Thanks so much for listening. Dude, I Was Thinking is hosted by Sanaya Chandar and Ketki Sharma. Our producer for this episode is Yash Hirave.
You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your audio content. Be sure to follow us at DIWTpod on Twitter and at Dude I Was Thinking on Instagram. If you have a fleeting thought you'd like us to dissect and analyze or want to collaborate, write to us at dudeIwasthinking@gmail.com.
Stay tuned for the next episode.